That's what simply what we're, the whole idea that there might be some movement of the mind and soul to truth is incompatible with the entire intellectual architecture undergirding the Great Separation. It also assumes, as I said a moment ago, that the theological political problem is frozen in time and ignores new threats to human freedom that have arisen out of the modern solution to this problem. In other words, modern secularism has engendered some very real problems of its own. Those threats include the specters of soft and hard despotism as well as indifference to truth. In The City of Man, Manon provides a particularly illuminating explanation for liberalism's drift toward militant indifference to truth. The authorization of every citizen to pursue his good in the private realm risks becoming a new command or injunction to ignore the pursuit of truth and goodness in the name of respecting the equality of every human being's subjective judgment. The liberal order allows indifference, quote, toward all goods that are the object of human searching, even truth, which is the chief good. The spirit of radical modernity takes things a step further. The radical relativist commands indifference to the truth. This is the spirit of almost every university today. So the radical relativist commands indifference to the truth, thus giving rise to a new and paradoxical order of authoritarian command, this time in the name of a punishing relativism or political correctness. So what began as a salutary effort to prevent the appropriation of the idea of the good by political and ecclesiastical tyrants becomes a new source of tyranny and dehumanization. The dictatorship of relativism, famously spoken of by Pope Benedict XVI a few days before his selection as Pope. But the preservation of the noble aspirations of liberalism demands resisting the full implementation of the project of intellectual separation, since that project ultimately demands the radical severing of human freedom from the moral contents of life, or the radical severing of truth and liberty. Now, Manon points out that it was the Catholic Church that for the longest time insisted that liberalism, or naturalism, as the Church called it in the 19th century, would inevitably give rise to more radical and consistent forms of human self-affirmation, such as socialism or communism. It seems to me that Christian Democrats have been too eager to argue for the essential compatibility of Christianity and democracy, rather than putting the stress on the need for a fulsome prudential accommodation between the Church and the liberal order. For all its practical merits, this Christian democratic position obscures the origins of philosophical liberalism in a polemical reaction to the political power of the Church. It also ignores the insight of an older, more anti-modern Church. This is what they used to say in France in the 19th century, that the rights of man were too often claimed at the expense of the rights of God. Instead of proclaiming the Christian origins of liberalism, or confusing Christianity with secular humanitarianism, as progressivist Christians are prone to do, the Church can contribute to the cause of freedom by upholding the truth as it understands it. When Pope Benedict XVI warned in his September 2006 Regensburg address against reducing Christianity to what he called a humanitarian moral message, he was speaking both in the name of the integrity of the faith, principally so, and out of genuine solicitude for the well-being of a liberal and democratic order. Christianity can exercise its influence on the souls of men. It can help fortify an understanding of liberty as liberty under God, only if it rejects the temptation to become a wholly democratic religion. And by the way, full genuflection before democracy inevitably creates further pressures for the full democratization of the Church. The Church needs to think more about that problematic. Or as Pierre Menant recently put it, the religion of humanity is not our religion. Right? And by the way, you hear a lot of churchmen speak, sometimes very authoritative churchmen. You sometimes get the impression that the religion of humanity is our religion. So careful reflection on this problem serves to moderate any excessive hopes for creating a new post-liberal consensus that could purge liberalism of its intrinsic and historical identification with human self-sovereignty. The 19th century American Catholic journalist, writer, and political philosopher Orestes Brownson noted that the state of nature doctrine, that human beings are free and equal, that there's no authority above them, that political communities are conventional formations that are simply products of agreement, of contract. He says, this was, and this is Bronson's language, part of the political tradition of the United States. In the famous words of the Declaration of Independence, government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. All Americans, one might add almost everyone in the liberal West today, agrees that no man has the right to govern another human being without his consent. But some, as Brownson points out, some locate this prohibition against despotic rule in the absolute freedom or autonomy of the individual, while others, including many of the founders themselves, deny that the individual has, to quote Brownson, a sovereign right even to himself, or the right to dispose of himself as he pleases. So we're left with a choice. We can conceive of man as the sovereign lord of existence, the autonomous creator of his own values, or we can see in him a being who participates in a natural order that he did not make, an order of things that gives meaning to his freedom and that makes sense of his search for truth. In the latter understanding, eloquently upheld by Brownson, I quote again, man is not God, independent, self-existing, and self-sufficing. Rather, quote again, he is dependent and dependent not only on his maker, but on his fellow man, on society, and even on nature or the material world. And as Peter Lawler very nicely said, that ultimately the anthropology that undergirds a regime of freedom is a recognition that we're relational beings, relational eyes, right? The task of a chastened liberalism, no less than of a Christian religion faithful to its own wisdom, is to remind men and women inebriated with the ideology of consent or absolute autonomy that human beings are truly free only when they know they are not gods. The next task is to draw the appropriate moral and political conclusions from this insight. Thank you.